you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they want to do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shit.
How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. We're going to kind of stay on track with inmate manipulation. I'm actually working on a book. So as I write the book, I discover new things, and then I want to go ahead and just pretty much read what I've written to everybody here, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of share some thoughts that came to mind while I'm writing. And actually, good thing is, guys, I am working hard on it. Connie's helping me with it, and we are at just completed chapter 3, probably about 6 more chapters left. I think the book will be about 8 to 9 chapters, and it'll be a little over 100 pages. So I think it's going to be a really good definitive guide. But today we're going to talk about isolation of staff, how inmates, when they go to set up staff, when they go to pull staff out of their prescribed role, one of the techniques that they utilize is isolation of staff, which is actually very dangerous because not only can the inmates create situations for staff to be isolated, but we also can create that. Or sometimes situations just occur, and inmates that are very aware about situations, like situational awareness, have very good high situational awareness, will easily pounce on those situations. But guess who I have with me today, guys? Connie. What's up, Connie? Interested in this topic?
Hello. Hi. Yes, Connie. I'm always interested in the topic. Look how much we talk about in corrections. It's crazy. Connie Alleyne here. I'm the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. And of course, we want to talk about isolation because I think as a system can put our people at risk based on some of just our policies and procedures. But I think it's great that we're going to be talking about it.
Now, Connie, should I introduce you as a podcaster, an author? I mean, what do you got going on nowadays?
Oh my gosh. So I have my podcast, The Fly Behind the Wall, which is, we just wrapped up season 2. So we'll be re-recording soon, and Anthony will be in season 3 for sure. And then I have authored a book. It is in its last stages of editing and proofreading and such. It is called The Cage Was Her Cocoon, A Journey from Prison Administrator to Entrepreneur. And the pre-sales start October 15th, and the actual full release will be October 30th, 2020. So soon come.
Wow. And just out of curiosity, from once your manuscript was completed and you sent it to the editors, how long of a process was that?
It only took so I think for one, it counts on the availability of the editor. So she happened to have opening on her schedule. It took her only a few days to go through and read and do the line editing. And now we're in that phase of copy editing where she will be the last hands to touch the manuscript before it goes to print.
Hopefully she will be helping me with mine. If she watches this episode, I'm coming for you. So guys, this will be a great topic. Again, isolation, something that we really should pay attention to, because at the end of the day, this is what can lead to more developed games. So this is a great way to nip a game before it even has the chance to begin. Now, guys, if you haven't, the show Tier Talks for you brave men and women that work in corrections. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We'll go to our sponsor. When we come back, we'll talk about isolation of staff. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it. It's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Guys, inmate manipulation is a course that is highly needed. It's the process that's so slow moving and subtle that you don't realize it's happening. When inmates choose to manipulate, they manipulate our need to react. Situational awareness and insight is going to save your career. It's going to save you from doing foolish things. Listen to your gut. So the more insight we have, the more we can recognize what isn't so overt, and we can correct our behavior before we fall into a trap that we can't get out of. If you allow an inmate to pull you out of your prescribed role, you are opening up a door for a host of problems. Inmate manipulation, the psychology behind inmate manipulation. Available now. Link in description. All right, and we're back. So, Connie, again, isolation of staff doesn't matter if you're custody. It doesn't matter if you're a civilian staff member. I mean, let's be honest. If staff get isolated, when we say isolation, we mean isolated from your proper support, from your peers, from the proper resource that you're supposed to have. How dangerous can that be?
So, I mean, certainly we find that when the inmate has the ability to isolate a staff, that we're already behind the 8 ball, right? Because that means he's already started or she has already started the process, and the staff are already being seen as being vulnerable. So there's a lot of work I think that we have to do up front to try to make sure that if we see a particular staff member being isolated, I mean, you see that when, you know, I've had the experience of, Miss Alleyne, can I talk to you for a second? I could be with a group of people and that offender is trying to pull me off to the side to have a conversation. There are no private conversations. So if you need to talk to me, I'm with other professionals. You can talk to me in front of those professionals. But I think sometimes we don't realize that even the slight pulling you to a side is a way of isolating you, because now they can talk to you about something that may be out of your scope and there's no witness to that conversation.
I like how you mentioned too, can I talk to you in confidence? Because what a great test. They'll tell you something that requires an action, and then you go ahead and not commit to something. So then they know, okay, this person didn't go anywhere with that information that I gave them. Now, isolation of staff is actually controlled both ways, believe it or not. Not only is it about pulling staff members, the targeted staff member kind of in limbo before you embrace them, before the inmate population embrace them, but it's also setting up a perspective where not only is staff pushing their peers away, but the peers are pushing that targeted staff member away. Now, a couple of ways that this could be created, and we'll just kind of, as we talk through it, we'll talk about ways to protect yourself, of course. Like definitely what Connie said, that communication is definitely key. I mean, if anything, communicate. You know, talk to your peers, talk to your proper resources, and let the inmates see that. Make that visible. You know, let the inmates, you know, be aware of the fact that, yes, I'm connected to my peers. I'm connected to my support. And that's something that will make you less likely be a target to be chosen. But one of the ways that you can have a staff member get isolated, there's something between two staff members that the inmates take witness of. Like, it happened to me, it happens to a lot. But sometimes you have two staff members that may not get along, and it's made evident to the inmate population that these two staff members don't get along. And manipulative inmates will go ahead and fuel both sides. They'll play both sides against each other to kind of push them apart, to further the divide. And Connie, you know they love that. When they see two staff members that don't get along, you know for a fact inmates will get right into the middle of that. And also, it's not just two staff members. How about two departments?
Yep.
You know, so how easy can an inmate play into two staff members, let's just say, just not getting along, and they're aware that these two staff members don't get along?
Oh, that's real easy. I mean, especially if, you know, the staff members are so at odds and the inmates have been able to witness like an exchange, right? So like all you need is for there to be like a little blow up or there to be a little friction and the inmates get wind. The next thing you know, you have the inmate going to this one to say, oh, you know what's going on in the housing unit, or they said that, you know, such and such said this about you, you know, and, you know, for those, there's some insecure folks, right? And it's coming from a not credible source, but it gets you so upset that it's a possibility, either one, that it could ruin your reputation, or two, that it was actually said, right? Like, so people just, you know, the egos get in the way, a lot of different things happen. But like, I feel that when we remain professional and we kind of take a step back, it's like, okay, well, why would the inmate be coming to me to tell me this? Right. And I think instead of going with the flow and wanting to get into the fight, right, because sometimes you just like want to air it out, the other times it's saying like, you know, I need to be smart about this. And I do need to think about, what does the inmate have to gain by telling me this information? Is there something they're expecting me to do in exchange for this information they just brought to me? And why would they be expecting me to do it? You know, a lot of times we're not thinking that deeply because it's happening in the moment. Maybe we're in a passion, tensions are high. And so it's easier to kind of to feed into this situation that the inmate is creating.
Yeah, I like what you said about certain questions to ask yourself. I've always asked myself, like, why is this inmate asking me? Like, what is it that the inmate wants, but why are they asking me for it? And you mentioned something that really hit home. I'll share a little personal story, if I may. I mean, I usually don't because, again, I'm still connected to the job, but it plays into exactly what we're discussing here, where sometimes inmates may hear enough and have enough information to be credible when they play whatever game that they're going to play with the divide. So I remember where I don't really go out much after work. I never really did. I mean, I do have a few people I connect with, you know, but never really. I would always I go home. You know, end of my day, I go home, get with the family and give them my time. If by chance I do go out, if I'm able to take the family with me, I do. So that the people I have connected with is because our families have connected. And again, that's my fault. I think I should always try to connect with staff as much as I can. But, you know, again, you have family obligations, you know, so I try to make both meet, if you will. So I'll hang out with staff, family to family. One day I did go out and I did have a good time with a few people. And it was funny because it was only a few of us that went. So there was actually an inmate that was very familiar with the event that happened when we went out the night before. And the thing is the only way she could have been familiar with it in my mind was if she was compromising the staff member I went out with that day, the gentleman I went out with. And it caused a divide between me and him for quite some time because I said, well, the only way she's going to know this is if you told her. And then he would say the same thing on me because she was also talking to him. And, well, the only way she would know this is if you told her. So we had this back and forth. I really couldn't place, you know, if you didn't say it and I didn't say it, then who the hell said it? It was basically you had to say something or I had to say something. We both kind of just stopped talking. The divide was in place. And it was funny because the inmate knew enough to where we wanted to know more about what she was saying. That's the funny thing. But then you don't want to get the inmate involved either. So there's a level of curiosity that overwhelms you. But technically what I should have done at the very beginning was the moment the inmate tried to get that in, it's like, shut up, none of your business what happened, and then go ahead and talk to the officer, let the officer know, hey, this is what this inmate's trying to say. I cut it down. But of course, there's that level of curiosity, and that builds on to you wanting to know more about what that inmate has to offer. Anyway, eventually one of the officers that we connected with at the time, he didn't come out with us, by the way, at this moment, but he wound up being compromised by her before we even went out. And when me and this officer were sharing our story in this area, the arcade it's called, he overheard it. And at the time, he was already compromised. So he was sharing everything with the inmate. Now, we had no idea to place this individual. You know, we didn't know at the time he was compromised. We didn't know at the time he was this close to this individual. And basically, she just played into both sides. Because deep down inside, she knew that we couldn't identify him. So all that was left would be each other. And that divide really played out, and it was evident. It was just, again, the beginning of our career, and we're still trying to maneuver. I know a lot more now than I do then. And the right approach should have been approaching that officer, cutting the inmate at its source, and trying to see what the hell is going on. But that divide, especially if there's a level of credibility from that inmate, when they're sharing that story, you have to kind of do the opposite and cut that inmate. It's like, I don't care what you know about me at this point. Let me go ahead and talk to the other officer before I start playing into this game. Eventually, I'll find out what you know, but more importantly, I'll find out how you know it. Because all that did was she was just kind of adding fuel to the fire. So again, if we're unprofessional at work, inmates see it, it carries out. That's why it's very important that we as management kind of nip as best we can the personality conflicts by telling people you have to be professional with each other. I'm not here to choose right or wrong. At the end of the day, if you're not professional with each other, you're both wrong. I don't care if he did this or she did that. It doesn't matter. You'll be professional at work, because when you're not professional, the inmates will pounce on that divide. And the only person that wins between two employees that don't get along is the inmate population. We know that. And again, for departments, I always tell civilian staff in custody, you got to work as one. You have to work as one. You have to let the inmates see that you work together as one. Because if at any point you have civilians bad-mouthing custody, I'm talking about generally now. Now this is the bigger part of it all. Or custody bad-mouthing civilians, you're leaving both sides vulnerable. My concern here too is if you have a civilian that for some reason has a problem with, let's say, one officer, but they generalize it out. If it's all custody, just like custody may generalize it out that it's all civilians, you're leaving that civilian on an island by themselves, and you're kind of their rescue boat, custody. So if you feel at any point there's a concern or a divide between the civilians in custody, we should have people trying to reinforce a connection, right? Would you agree that anytime, for me, if a civilian feels that custody is a certain way about them, or just there's just not a connection there, we need to do what we can, both from the civilian higher level and from the custodial higher level, to say, hey, listen, we got to reinforce this connection, because if not, we're going to have people separated. And again, the inmates get right into the middle of that.
For sure. So, I mean, one thing we know is that people have a natural inclination to want to belong. You want to be a part of the team. You want to feel included. And so when we get into these spaces where it is the inmates see there's a divide between custody and civilians, they're able to use that as, their way to kind of get in between. And it further isolates the civilian, right? Because then it becomes, these are your problems, not my problems, because you guys don't embrace us. You're not, I don't feel like I'm a part of your team. And I think that goes a very long way as it relates to inmates being able to isolate. I mean, I think the other thing, as I was thinking about something you said, when in fact you get into a situation where there's an inmate trying to pull you aside, or even they catch you're by yourself, right? Because I mean, I know for me, I've got nurses who would go do meds on their own. It's a med pass for a special situation or something. They're on their own. They go out. And, on the walkway, you've got inmates that are trying to ask them for things as they're walking back to the unit. And, as we're having this conversation, I'm like, wow, I probably should have never did that. That nurse probably should have always had a partner. I mean, thankfully, we didn't see any incident happen, but it is a point of vulnerability now that I think about knowing that this is the floater nurse and she's kind of off on her own all the time. But the other thing that I was thinking about was when you have those situations where you are by yourself, to protect yourself, one of the things you could do is if you see like an officer or one of your colleagues, you can say, hey, can you come over here for a second? Right? Like invite other people to the conversation so that it helps protect you. Even if you don't know the game is being played or something is like, you're being targeted, like at least you're not in that conversation on your own. And it's no longer your word against their word. It is, you have a witness to the conversation and you are better positioned, I think, to defend yourself should anything ever come up.
Yeah, and that's great advice. Actually, every time I talk to an inmate, I try to have somebody with me, especially now that I'm in the manager side. Reason why, one thing is, right, I have two people that heard what I said or witnessed the exchange, but also just in case the inmate starts to take me down a path I'm not aware of, I have someone that, hey, Gangi, step back for a second. Let's rethink this because we're going somewhere we don't want to be. And that's great. We have each other's back. Also, just going back about the floating nurse, definitely a topic that me and you could cover on season 3, Fly Behind the Wall. And hopefully it's not the final season after I'm on it. But okay, so basically, I mean, these are definitely some situations where we may actually be giving the inmate the opportunity to pounce, right? We agree to that, right? Now, there's also some other situations that people may not really realize, and that I'm going to put out there right now, is we have isolated posts that are not connected to any staff. And now that you don't have lineup or, you don't have a way for staff to see each other at the beginning of the shift, they could go years and not see each other. So I think at that point, you should always make supervisors should always kind of frequent those areas a little bit more, especially if they're if the isolated staff members overseeing the inmate population. Let's make sure that we get some staff out there just to have that connection and let the inmates see that connection. Sometimes if you have extras, assign a couple officers out there or assign a couple of staff members out there if possible. I know extras is tough now, and that could be even maybe medical. If you have isolated posts, try to bring some connection back to that individual who's out there, because you have two concerns. One thing is it's isolated, so we want to bring back that connection. But second thing is, I've always had concerns of why people want those isolated posts. It may not always be for the days off. It may be that they don't want to be bothered. Well, now they themselves are putting themselves on an island, and that kind of crosses into the next caveat, which is disgruntled workers, people that are just constantly negative, how much we want to push away from them. And, so now you have an individual who's disgruntled, who's pushing people away, but also we ourselves don't want to be around them. So again, if you have that disgruntled worker, as much as you just don't want to deal with that individual, you have to. Am I right, Connie? You're smiling a little bit, but am I right?
Absolutely, because you have those colleagues that have those prickly personalities, and you would rather not be around them, right? And so I could see avoiding that person, as well as that person probably being intentionally prickly so people could leave them alone. I just think either way, when people are left alone, they are left vulnerable. And I think as managers, we have to be intentional about making sure we either, I don't want to say we micromanage them, because that's always bad, but that we are intentional about being around them, about including them, about having others around them, prickly or not. And sometimes it is a matter of supervision, right? Like you've got to sometimes just bring that situation to the light, like, hey, listen, you're being a jerk, no one doesn't want to be around you, and let's work on that. Sometimes it's a training thing. Sometimes they're disgruntled for a reason they haven't talked about to anyone yet. And maybe if you establish that it's a safe conversation and perhaps there's something you could do to help fix it, it might help resolve the personality challenge. But certainly I do see that, they can be vulnerable. And also when they're not feeling as a part of the bigger team, it's easier for the inmates to pull them onto their team. It's easier for them to, start engaging more with the population, because, those are the ones that they're providing for from a care perspective. Or if you're in the unit, I can imagine, you're having more interactions with the inmates than you are with your colleagues when you are in an isolated post. And I could see there being some shift in the thought process, as well as a shift in, where you feel your alliances are.
Right. And actually, I think if you explain to the isolated employee, especially as a supervisor, what their actions are doing. Like, I know you're going through this, whatever it is, but let me just tell you the consequences of what's happening when you're pushing people away and then they themselves don't want to be around you. And that's another part of the perspective, guys. When there's a separation, even if it's that one employee, let's say it's a rookie, and they're able to get their hold on that rookie really quick, and they pull that rookie out of that peer support, out of that resource that they need, and they kind of have that rookie in limbo, and they're trying to get to that point where they make that rookie come to them, because that's when they want to embrace that, rookie. That's when they want to really push that animosity towards the right group that they should belong to, and then go ahead and embrace them because can't go to them, because you guys don't get along. One of the things that they tend to do that people may not realize is that as they build a relationship with themselves and that rookie who is now compromised, there's another perspective. They want that relationship to be seen by the peers, so the peers don't react and the peers go away. You see? So you have two things happening here. As you have one thing is they pull the rookie away by showing animosity towards the other group, but then in the process, as they embrace that rookie, they want these staff members to see that. So now you have a pull from the inmate population, but a push from the peers. So you pretty much have, they're going right into that circle. You know, you agree. So, I mean, obviously you could see that's a well-played plan, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, how many times have we seen it happen though? I mean, I've seen people get walked out for that same purpose, for that same reason. The vulnerability is real. And I think it's being able to be proactive or really just directly address the issue as opposed to allowing it to play out, because it usually doesn't end well.
And, you know, I will say one thing before we come to a close. When you have these conflicts with, let's say, another staff member, you really don't want to call that other staff member when there's a concern that would require their help. You'll go around them. You'll do whatever you can not to call that employee, not to call that proper resource. So imagine if the inmates can turn you, imagine if the inmates can turn you against custody itself. You know, we're talking about, you know, the department that you belong to. So now you have your peers pushing you away. You have yourself pulling yourself away. And now when an issue happens, you yourself don't want to go to them. But you're in desperation mode, especially if you're a rookie. Go through something ambiguous. I need information. So out of desperation, you build a trust with the inmate population. Hey, Connie, have anything you want to say in closing?
I would just say, like, so you just brought up that ambiguity, and I just feel like, you know, the more that we communicate with each other, the less ambiguous things can become, right? Because even in our dialogues, we clear things up for each other. I think even while we're talking, and I think that as we are in facilities and we get into these situations where we may feel isolated, or we are actually isolated because of where our post is, you know, it's reaching out to not feel alone, reaching out to remain connected. Even if your supervisor isn't doing it, it's okay for you to reach out to make sure they remember that you're over there. They remember that you are in an isolated space, and that it's important that you still know what's going on in the facilities and you still know what's happening operationally. Sometimes I feel like we forget about that person or those folks who are in those isolated spaces, and we forget how vulnerable they can be. So, you know, I would just say to those people who are in those spaces to also reach out to make sure you're not forgotten.
Yeah, I agree. And again, education like this will help them realize exactly where they're at. Because sometimes you don't know. Insight, situational awareness, you know, very key to have in this profession, because trust and believe the inmates have it. So you better have it. Hey, it took me insight and situational awareness to realize that there are certain titles for the book I am creating. I'm going to do a little plug. Or maybe the book that you created that may not work because of the perspective. So I'll give you an example. How to Manipulate Correctional Staff. It's a great book, but who am I selling it to? Breaking, or for Connie, Breaking Out of the Cage. It's a good book. Who are you selling it to? As always, guys, the show is Teared Up. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.